Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Corinne. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our December 2020 Green Infrastructure, Climate, and Cities seminar hosted by Drexel University. Let's go to the next slide. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, this is a monthly series, the Green Infrastructure, Climate, and Cities seminar. We hold this series on the first Wednesday of every month. We were having these on campus at Drexel until March. Now we're having them as webinars for the foreseeable future via Zoom. All of these presentations are recorded and archived on ccron.org. So if you go on our website, you can see all of our seminars from the past several years. For today's session, we have several speakers, and you are able to ask questions at any point during the seminar by using the Q&A box to submit questions. Please refrain from using the chat for questions. It's a little bit easier for us to be organized if you use that Q&A box and when you hover over at the bottom of your screen. You can also upvote on questions that you would like to be asked, and you can also comment on questions that are asked. And if you really want to ask a verbal question, you can also raise your hand and I can unmute you so that you can ask a verbal question if you so choose. Today's topic, if you've been kind of following us the last few months, we've been covering a range of climate activities, particularly climate resilience and climate action happening at different scales from different governments. We've taken a look at what's going on with climate resilience in Boston, Pittsburgh, and New York City. Last month, we were in Newark and Baltimore. And this month, we're looking at two different places, the Shinnecock Indian Nation on the east end of Long Island, as well as the state of Pennsylvania. This has been kind of a mini series that we've been hosting within our larger series of Green Infrastructure, Climate, and Cities. Starting next month will be, for January, we're going to be starting an environmental justice mini series for January, February, and March. In January, we'll be having that on the second Wednesday of the month to align with programming that's happening at the Academy of Natural Sciences for environmental justice. And we'll be looking at a Philly environmental justice story with the PES refinery in South Philly. So you can join us next month for that. For today, we have four speakers joining us. I'm going to read some of their bios so you can get to know some of our speakers. From the Shinnecock Indian Nation, we have Shavonne Smith. Shavonne is the director of the Shinnecock Indian Nation Environmental Department. She oversees the daily operations of the department, plans and implements community outreach programming, and guides the development of the environmental program for the tribe. In addition to helping develop adaptation plans and a vulnerability assessment, her work includes gathering baseline data, developing a water quality monitoring program, an integrated solid waste management plan, coordinating a community garden, and managing an oyster grow-out system. After Shavonne, we'll move into Pennsylvania with our next speaker, Heidi Kunka. Heidi has been employed by PADP, the Department for Environmental Protection, for 12 years, 7 of which have been with the State Energy Office, where she currently serves as an energy program specialist. She currently assists in managing all aspects of Pennsylvania Climate Change Act, including the PA Climate Impacts Assessment, Climate Action Plan, Annual Greenhouse Gas Inventory, and Climate Change Advisory Council. For 2.5 years, Heidi served as director of U.S. Green Building Council, Central PA, during which she led a highly visual advocacy initiative, Ice House Demonstration Day, Unfreeze PA Energy Codes, which raised awareness about the need to update our state energy codes and culminated in a press conference in front of the state capitol. Next, we'll have Madeleine Pelchat. She is a senior at our very own Drexel University, working towards a BS in chemical engineering and an MS in environmental engineering, specializing in environmental modeling and policy. During her junior year, she participated in the first PA local climate action program, assisting Bellefonte Borough with their first greenhouse gas inventory and climate action plan through 2050. Outside of her coursework, Maddie is a 2020 Udall Environmental Scholar, an active member of Drexel Sierra Club, and a mentor for the Society of Women Engineers. And then we'll have Eric Raabe, a master's candidate in public administration with a concentration in energy and environment at the University of Pittsburgh Graduate School of Public and International Affairs. At the university, Eric interned for the PA-DEP inaugural cohort of the state's local climate action program, where he developed greenhouse gas inventories and climate action plans for 3 municipalities outside of Pittsburgh. Eric currently works at the Congress of Neighboring Communities as its regional climate plan coordinator, where he is working to establish a multi-municipal climate program that reduces emissions and encourages long-term participation in sustainability among member governments. So those are our speakers today. I'm going to pass it off to Shavonne to tell us about the Shinnecock Indian Nation.
Sorry, my computer slowed down a little bit. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shavonne Smith. I'm a member of the Shinnecock Indian Nation, and I serve as the environmental director. I've held the position since 2011. Actually helped with the development and implementation of the department. Prior to that, it was called the Shinnecock Shellfish Hatchery and Environmental Center, and our main focus was oyster grow out. So today I'm going to talk about some of our efforts to do some climate change adaptation planning. But first, I just wanted to share. So we're located on the eastern end of Long Island. For many people who don't know, we are one of the 2 remaining tribes. We are a federally recognized tribe on the eastern end of Long Island. We have 1,500 members on the roll, but everyone doesn't live there. There's only about 620 something tribal members that actually reside there. So I also wanted to include for you today this little map just so that you could really get a clear understanding of where we are. So if you'll notice, we are just east of the village of Southampton, but the Southampton town is in Shinnecock territory. There's the barrier island, the Dune Road, and below that is the Atlantic Ocean. Shinnecock Bay is right here, and then there's also Heidi Creek to the east and Old Fort Pond to the west. So the peninsula is surrounded by those 3 bodies of water. So as you can tell, the majority of our climate change concerns come from shoreline erosion, storm surge, sea level rise. All those things are concerns for us. So this photo here is actually a picture that I took today of the Shinnecock shoreline, which was the focal point of a big restoration project that we completed from 2015 to 2018 is when it ended. It entailed lots of sand being pumped from Shinnecock Bay onto our shoreline to try and help slow down some of the sand that was being lost and shifted from the shore. There was a lot of components that went into it. There was about 7 components that went into this project right here. I'll talk about that again in a little bit. I don't want to skip too far ahead. What I thought I would do is really talk about how we began developing for climate change and how the discussion started. So really like around 2011, 2012, it really was just a general conversation that we was having with people in the community, trying to get a gauge of what were some of the major concerns from some of the elders. What were the hunters noticing when they were going out? Were the baymen experiencing anything that they wanted to share that they had concerns about? And then we actually had the opportunity to work with a consultant in 2013 because one of our tribes in upstate New York, members of the Haudenosaunee, they had written a grant and the consultant would come and work with all the tribes in New York State. So our first plan was developed with the assistance of this consultant. It actually had a pretty quick turnaround, and so we didn't really get to get as much community involvement as we had hoped to, but we was grateful to have a start and to at least have a plan that would go into writing that we could then use to continue adding on to and broadening what we wanted to look at. So when we developed the first version, it really just focused in on the brief conversations we'd had with tribal members and department staff observations. It wasn't as community wide as I'd liked it to be, but like I said, it was a short turnaround time. But coming in recently to 2019, I guess it was just last year, we did a updated vulnerability assessment, and we worked with the Peconic Estuary Program, who received funding through EPA, to have a consultant to come in and help do a new vulnerability assessment. And this time we were able to include other tribal departments in the discussion, which really broadened up the areas of concern for the nation. And they weren't just focused solely on the shoreline, but we had transportation participate. The housing department was able to participate. We had sent out some of the ways that we were trying to communicate with people was surveys. So we did questionnaires at different community events. We have two major outreach events every year. We have our Earth Day Social and we have our Water Quality Day Awareness. And during that time, we tried to just field out the community, get them to talk with us about what they are concerned about, try to share information, point out things that maybe they aren't thinking about, but try to get their attention and bring their attention to that. In addition to the discussions, the surveys, we also sent out a questionnaire to all the departments. So everybody tends to think that climate change is just an environmental issue, and they're not really thinking about how all those impacts will affect the work that they do. And so by providing them with this questionnaire, it really started the conversation. And so like even finance got into the discussion on how, you know, their work would be impacted in the future possibly. So that is some of the ways that we try to engage the community, engage other departments, and engage tribal leadership a little more in a discussion to really, enhance our climate change adaptation plan. So we're in the process of drafting a new one, and hopefully soon, we'll have an updated document. So I just have a few notes here. I just want to make sure that I say everything. Let's see, I have another slide here. I can go ahead and talk about, oh, that picture did not come out the way I hoped it would. If you lean into your screen, I apologize that the picture is so small. I thought that I would show you this. This is from the restoration work that actually took place along the shoreline. And so what you're looking at right here is originally years and years ago, back in the 80s, I guess it's not that far ago. In the 80s, the tribe had made an attempt to really slow down some of that erosion that they was noticing taking place. And so you see, it's just like old concrete and, crushed cement block that they were trying to hold in place, but it didn't help. So the shore continued to erode and cut, or actually around the side of that. And so we were fortunate to receive funding through NIFWIF following the Hurricane Superstorm Sandy. And this right here is a picture of the dredge. So what they did was they pumped Shinnecock Bay for, it was like 2 weeks straight, a 24-hour-a-day operation. And they were doing a maintenance dredge on the inlet. And so the land that goes between Shinnecock Bay and the Atlantic Ocean has to be routinely pumped out, so to keep the water flowing and the boat traffic. And so the sand that they were pumping out, we were able to get pumped onto the beach, which actually was a tremendous help because that would have been a great expense just in itself. That project really, I believe, was helped by the fact that we had a climate adaptation plan. So when we put on our proposal, we had already began to identify what our concerns were and what we were hoping to achieve. That speaks to one of the challenges of our community. So it's, some people would like to think of it like, it's more than just a neighborhood, but it's not quite a city, right? So when you're talking about a small tribal community like Shinnecock, it really is a group of people who are interrelated in one way or another, who share a common land. So the land is communally owned. There's no tax base. We don't tax each other. So there's no revenue generated from taxes. And so when you're looking at projects like this and other ways of fighting climate change and preparing yourself, doing those mitigation efforts, you really are dealing with the fact that you have limited financial resources. And so it becomes very necessary to constantly pursue grant opportunities and other sources of income and revenue to complete projects like this. So we've been very fortunate in finding funds, but we've also managed to create lots of great partnerships and working relationships where other agencies bring resources and training that have helped us not only do this, but address some of our other concerns. I think that I'm going to actually end now. And if there's any questions, I'll answer questions, but I kind of feel like I'm starting to ramble a little bit. So I'm going to end here, if that's fine.
Thanks, Shavonne. And yeah, definitely, if folks have questions, please put them into the Q&A box. I'm wondering, because I know that you've participated in CC Run's Managed Retreat Conference in 2019, I suppose. I'm curious how your community is talking about managed retreat, and if that's a conversation that you're having, and how you're thinking about your land as sea level rises and parts of your land that is vulnerable to sea level rise and storm surge.
Yeah, so that's a very complicated discussion. It's a very sensitive discussion. It is something that prior trustee boards, when I refer to trustees, that's actually our elected officials. Our councilmen are also called trustees. So through the years, they have identified possible places that if we had to move to, we would try to. But the idea of actually leaving the only place that for generations and generations and generations people have lived and known, it becomes more than just a simple clear-cut decision and discussion. I will say though that one of the things that really what we're trying to look at right now is along the edge of Shinnecock, there are a number of homeowners. And when they originally built their homes, they weren't as close to the water as they are now. So we would like to have all those homes assessed so we could see, is it the type of thing where, we could make upgrades to the home that would help them with storm surge and prevent them from having flooding basements? Or is it the type of thing where maybe those particular homeowners would have to, in a sense, retreat further inland onto Shinnecock? So I think it's got multiple possibilities. It might not be like a whole community up and moving and leaving Shinnecock, but it might be a few homeowners along the edge where it's saying, okay, you know what, your house is no longer inhabitable here, and either we have to find the resources to move the house further in, or just completely basically abandon the structure. And thankfully, we're not at that point, but it's good to begin those discussions and really have homeowners understand what is being experienced around the edge of the res is not just going to stop. So even though we are attempting to mitigate and slow down the erosion, it is still going to take place. Even since we put the sand there in 2015, we've noticed a shift in where it's going. And so it's really being pushed more so in other areas that are leaving very vulnerable, like the cemetery is once again a vulnerable spot. And when we first went into the project, and that picture I showed you going back into the 80s where they had put the concrete and the broken cinder block there, they were attempting to protect that area. It helped stay the damage a little bit, but it's already beginning to happen again. So these solutions, unfortunately, are still at the mercy of Mother Nature. And so they're temporary. You're really just buying time until you can come up with a different approach, a different solution.
I have, if you don't mind, I'll ask another question, a two-part question, and then if we don't have any questions coming in yet from Q&A after this, we can have Heidi queue up her slides for the next segment, and you're welcome to continue asking questions later on in the session if something comes to mind. But Shavonne, I'm struck by what you were talking about, that I imagine financing these projects is really challenging if you're relying on grants, if you have no tax base to be able to finance mitigation or adaptation strategies. So I'm wondering, you mentioned that you had been talking about climate before Hurricane Sandy or Superstorm Sandy. Was Superstorm Sandy a turning point for your done that made you rethink about what your community is going to do with climate change? And did Superstorm Sandy open up any opportunities for funding from, are you eligible for funding from the federal government to do any adaptation strategies post Sandy?
Well, the project that we did, the Coastal Restoration Project, the NIFWIF funding, was the result of Superstorm Sandy. So this whole pocket of money became available to communities, not just tribal communities, but all communities that were affected by Superstorm Sandy. So it was a competitive grant process. And so we were able to put together a proposal with the help of, tribal leaders, department staff, our partner, Cornell Cooperative Extension, USGS, Suffolk County, like all these entities came together to help us put together this proposal to really, bring to life that vision we had of how we wanted to restore our shoreline and, put a little more space between us and the water.
Excellent, thank you.
I think Superstorm Sandy also made it a little more relevant to community members. That becomes one of the other challenges is when you're working in your community and trying to get people to think about climate change planning and, begin to gather their thoughts and put their ideas down on paper. Sometimes it's not something that's very urgent for them. And so it doesn't become something that they want to sit down and chat about. So you have to find ways of making it relevant for them so that you can include their valuable input in the planning process.
Absolutely. And I lived in New York City a few years following Hurricane Sandy, and I feel like even just 4 or 5 years after the storm, another storm didn't come, and it started to kind of, the conversation started to dissipate already. And
right.
It's unfortunate that I was so disappointed that it takes a storm to get people talking about it. Right. But I'm glad that there hasn't been a storm since. Right. But it's important to keep that urgency up because you never know what's bringing the next hurricane.
Right.
Well, thank you so much, Shavonne. And we'll continue the Q&A after the Pennsylvania set of speakers. Heidi, if you're ready, you can go ahead and queue up your slides and we'll shift gears and go into Pennsylvania.
Sure. Okay, let me share my screen here. Okay. Can you see my screen, Corinne?
Yes, so it's in the PowerPoint mode, you might want to hit the presentation. It's not showing the presentation mode.
Yeah, I clicked it. It's taken a second to
no problem.
Actually process. So, all right, there we go.
Yep.
Thanks, Corinne, for having me here today, and hello, everyone in Northeast US who's tuning in. I am reporting in here from 2 Stoplight, Perry County, Pennsylvania, very rural county, and I live just a mile from the Susquehanna River, which is part of our nation's greatest estuary, the Chesapeake Bay. So I work for Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection's Energy Programs Office. We are a non-regulatory office, and we focus on energy efficiency, renewable energy, energy assurance, alternative fuels, and then climate change is the umbrella under which all of our work that I just mentioned falls. So today I am here to present on how the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is leading by example in regards to climate change. And then I'm going to share how the state is supporting local governments in doing the same. So first of all, we actually do have legislation in the Commonwealth that came out in 2008. It's Act 70 that basically tasks DEP with the following items. So once every 3 years, we must develop a climate impacts assessment for the state. Once every 3 years, we must also develop a climate action plan. And then every year, we develop an annual greenhouse gas inventory for the state. And then finally, every other month, we hold a climate change advisory committee. We've got 18 to 20 external stakeholders that sit on this advisory committee, and they basically give us guidance and their input on how we should move forward with climate change in the Commonwealth. So to touch on each of those, our most recent climate impacts assessment was issued earlier this year. And contrary to all of our prior climate impacts assessments, which focused on the basics of what everyone would think of as climate impacts, flooding, higher temperatures, more extreme storms, this really honed in on 3 major focus areas. And we utilize researchers at Penn State University to help compose this report for us. And it is available on the webpage shown here on my slide. The first item really focused on Pennsylvania livestock and how climate change is going to impact livestock production, because currently a large portion of US hog and poultry production is concentrated in warmer, more southern states. But these animals are heat-sensitive animals. So that's the reason why we may see a sort of mass movement of hog and poultry industry northward into states like Pennsylvania, because relatively speaking, we will be cooler than the southern states. So it is anticipated that Pennsylvania's poultry industry could more than double in size. And what that means, it has implications for the Chesapeake Bay. I kicked things off by saying that I live right beside the Susquehanna River, which is part of the Chesapeake Bay, our nation's largest estuary. So the quantities of nitrogen and phosphorus in that increased amount of animal manure it's going to run off into Chesapeake Bay and our waterways in the Commonwealth. So it's going to exacerbate current water quality concerns. So the report focuses on how we might need to change our total maximum daily loads, our TMDLs, and maybe make adjustments to best management practices, their design and location for stormwater best management practices like riparian buffers. And then finally, the report focused on the resilience of our critical infrastructure to extreme weather. For instance, in southwestern Pennsylvania, we have a lot of valleys that were carved out by rivers and then steep slopes alongside. So landslides in southwestern PA are already a problem, and we consider climate change a threat multiplier. That's what it can be called from time to time. So we're seeing more landslides now as a result of these extreme weather and extreme rain events that we're getting due to climate change. So a lot of our railway infrastructure is in the area of those landslides. So there's maps in this report that actually show some of our railway infrastructure that's at risk in the Commonwealth due to increased flooding. As for our most recent greenhouse gas inventory, it utilizes EPA's state inventory tool, the SIT tool, which is a very large, massive series of macro-enabled spreadsheets that we use from EPA, data from them, to create our annual greenhouse gas inventory. And they actually just released the 2018 data, So we're going to start working on our next inventory very soon, probably in January, once they work out some tweaks in the data. But if we look at the pie chart for all of our Commonwealth greenhouse gas emissions, you'll see that the industrial sector is our largest, and our industrial sector does include greenhouse gas emissions from coal mining and also natural gas production, of which everyone knows we are a huge Marcellus shale state, and a major energy exporter as well. So that's why you see our electricity production from our power plants as being our next major emitter. And then transportation would be our third largest. However, if you look at this pie chart in a different way, and you look at the residential, commercial, industrial, and transportation pieces of the pie, that makes up 66% of PA greenhouse gas emissions from energy consumption in those particular sectors. So that is a low-hanging fruit. That is really an area where we need to start with, reducing our energy use. Here is a picture of the cover page of our 2018 Climate Action Plan. It's our most recent plan. We are currently working with our consultant, ICF, to develop our next Climate Action Plan, which will be released next year. This particular plan is available on our DEP Climate webpage. We also have a shorter Cliff Notes version that's a little more digestible and readable. This particular report is over 150 pages. But the goals of the plan are to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions or reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the Commonwealth, while also adapting to the impacts that we're already seeing in the Commonwealth, all the while maintaining cost effectiveness. So this slide visually shows our Climate Action Plan targets, which are 26% reduction of net greenhouse gas emissions by 2025 from 2005 levels and 80% reduction by 2050. These goals are in line with the Paris Accord. And these goals were also stated in the very first executive order from Governor Wolf in his second term in office, which began January of 2019. So the Climate Action Plan is divided into 8 sectors. Those sectors are then divided into 19 strategies for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Those strategies are then further divided into 100 actions specifically for leaders of local governments and state government. And then we took 15 of those 100 leadership actions and had ICF quantitatively analyze those in a computer modeling system to determine the environmental and economic benefits of taking those actions. And then throughout the report, we also call out actions that citizens and businesses can take. So here are the 8 sectors that are focused on in the CAP, the Climate Action Plan. Obviously, these are probably no surprise to you, but I will state that only 3 of these sectors, the top 3, energy consumption, energy production, and agriculture, were chosen for inclusion in the quantitative modeling done by ICF. And that's because those particular actions in those sectors were deemed to be the most impactful. And I do want to mention that in our 2021 Climate Action Plan that we're currently developing, there will be a heavier focus on co-benefits from taking climate action, such as benefits to human health. So we are going to have an increased emphasis on human health and also environmental justice in our next report. So here are the 19 strategies that are outlined in the Climate Action Plan. Each strategy encompasses multiple actions, or specific policies, programs, or activities for state and local leaders. So you'll see energy efficiency is here, sustainable transportation, renewable energy on a distributed scale, and also on a large scale or utility scale. Agricultural best practices, stormwater best management practices, emergency preparedness, and then I've highlighted lead by example in Commonwealth and local government practices and assets, because that is the reason why we created our local climate action program, or LCAP, which I'm going to be touching on later in the presentation, and which we have some awesome students to present on what they've learned through our LCAP program. And so here are the 15 modeled, that were quantitatively modeled leadership actions. These start to really go into detail on energy efficiency, like updating building codes, focusing on our energy efficiency rebates that are provided by our utilities, our electric utilities in Pennsylvania, which is called Act 129. You'll see sustainable transportation on here, reducing vehicle miles traveled, a focus on renewable energy. And then finally, at the very bottom, our one agricultural action is no-till farming, so that we can sequester more carbon in our soils. Ag is the #1 industry in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So those 15 modeled actions that you saw on that last slide are denoted on this slide by the shading in this chart. So if those 15 actions were taken, you would see our reduction by 2050 on the far right, the reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions in the Commonwealth would not get us to our 2050 goal, which is at the very bottom right of the chart. And so this isn't meant to say, oh, we can't succeed. It's meant to say that all of those other 85 actions that are listed in the Climate Action Plan still need to be implemented. And it's an all hands on deck approach that's needed. It's not just these 15 actions for local and state government leaders, it's also businesses and citizens that need to take action, all hands on deck. And then throughout the Climate Action Plan, I mentioned earlier that there are notes for citizens and businesses on what they can do to reduce emissions. And the turquoise boxes are for businesses, and the royal blue boxes are the call outs for citizens. So how is Pennsylvania government leading by example on climate? I mentioned earlier about Governor Wolf's first executive order in his second term, which not only established the first ever greenhouse gas reduction goal for the Commonwealth, but also established the Pennsylvania Green Gov Council, 2 full-time staff that are tasked with implementing and incorporating sustainability and energy efficiency into all state agencies. So there were 4 goals that were set forth in the executive order that Green Gov is supposed to support the state agencies in achieving. So one is focused on energy efficiency, the first one. The second we have actually already met via the purchase of renewable energy credits. We do procure renewable energy to offset at least 40% of our Commonwealth electricity usage on an annual basis. And then also to design and construct high performance buildings. And then finally, to replace 25% of our state vehicle fleet with either battery electric vehicles or PHEVs, plug-in hybrid electrics, like the dinosaur Chevy Volt that sits in my garage. I no longer make it, and I absolutely love my Volt. I am officially getting 70 miles per gallon on average after 100,000 miles of driving it. So I always love to share that. I love my car. How else is the state government leading by example? Last year in April, when Governor Wolf issued our 2018 Climate Action Plan, it was actually released in April of last year, he also mentioned that same day that we were joining the U.S. Climate Alliance. So alliance states commit to implement policies that advance the goals of the Paris Agreement and report our progress to the global community. So when Pennsylvania joined last year, we became the 24th state to join the alliance. And those states at the time represented 55% of the US population and 60% of the national gross domestic product. And I do like to mention here that there are states in the US Climate Alliance that are Republican-led and Democratic-led. So you have Massachusetts and Maryland that are very vocal members of the US Climate Alliance. And a great reason for that is they have a lot of coastline. a lot of coastline. Sea level rise is a big issue, as our first presenter very well spoke of. And then also, some of you may have heard that Pennsylvania is in line to join RGGI, or the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, of which all Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states currently participate in, from Virginia north. Pennsylvania will be the last to join when we join officially in January 2022. Our air quality program at DEP worked to develop a regulation this past year to limit carbon dioxide emissions from our electric power plants. And that draft regulation is currently out for public comment. So Pennsylvania citizens can now comment on that. If you go to our RGGI webpage on the DEP website, you can submit your comments. So basically, RGGI, if you're not familiar with it, it's a cap and trade, or actually even better, cap and invest program. So if you remember how we solved the acid rain problem by a cap and trade program, this is the similar approach. We're setting a regional cap on greenhouse gas emissions in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states. And then electric power plants have the flexibility to decide, how they can actually meet those caps, and they can buy and sell emissions allowances in this market. So it is a market-based system for reducing emissions. And the proceeds from the sale of those allowances, those emissions allowances, will be invested in programs that reduce air emissions in the Commonwealth, air pollution emissions in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So, for instance, energy efficiency and renewable energy programs will be supported. So now on to how the state is supporting local governments in taking climate action. We are using federal money from U.S. Department of Energy to pay a nonprofit, ICLEI Local Governments for Sustainability, to train college student and local government teams on developing greenhouse gas inventories and climate action plans. It's an 11-month-long program that starts in August and ends in June. We just finished up our inaugural year of the program in June, and started a brand new program with 21 new participants in August. So last year we had 20 local governments participate, and this year we're having 21 participate. The inventory tool, if you are familiar with greenhouse gas inventory tools, ICLEI has their own proprietary inventory tool called ClearPath that you can only gain access to if you are an ICLEI member. So basically, this program makes all of our participating communities ICLEI members. So they have access to the ClearPath inventory tool. And Maddie will be explaining the ins and outs of the ClearPath tool, because in all honesty, our students understand the tool better than I, and I'm not afraid to say that. I manage this program, but I've seen Maddie present before on her knowledge of ClearPath, and it's stellar. So thanks, Maddie, for joining us today, as well as Eric. And this is our webpage for the LCAP program. If you wanted to see, we do have all of our recorded training webinars from the first year of the program on there, as well as all the resources that the local governments and students use to move through the program. So here's a visual representation of how the program is structured. U.S. Department of Energy funds funneled through to the state government, and we give that to ICLEI, who then in turn trains the local government and student teams. I work with advisors and professors from about a dozen universities in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Corinne being one of them. So that's the reason I was invited to present here today. Corinne participated in our inaugural year of the program and helped select students for participation, and she has students participating again in the second year of the program. So kudos to all of the advisors and professors out there that are providing students for this program. Here's our timeline. We start, the contract with ICLEI starts in July, and then we actually have the first training webinar in August to start developing greenhouse gas inventories. And then the final webinars in November. And currently the program participants are working to finalize their greenhouse gas inventories. Then in January, we start up the spring cohort, which is the climate action planning process, which involves community and stakeholder engagement. So I know many of you are not from Pennsylvania that are tuning in, but for those of you that are or are familiar with the geography of our state, we are a very large state, and we've made sure each year to really spread the love, make sure that we have townships, boroughs, cities, counties, and regional entities participating from throughout the state, Northwest, Southwest, South Central. I have Bellefonte Borough highlighted because that was Maddie's assigned community last year. West Homestead Borough was Eric's, the other student that's presenting today. That was his original assigned community, but he ended up assisting 2 other communities to reach the finish line and develop their draft climate action plans last year as well. So Eric is definitely a star pupil of the program, and that's why he is participating once again in the second year of the program for the Connect communities, the Congress of Neighboring Communities. They are, he'll explain better than I, but they are contiguous communities that surround and include the city of Pittsburgh, about 35 to 38 communities. So that is our regional entity that's participating along with 2 county governments, multiple cities, including our state capital this year are participating. And this is the current program year participants. And then here I have Maddie and Eric's universities highlighted here, and Corinne's, of course. And these are the other universities that we are working with in the Commonwealth. Formats for student engagement, I try to be really flexible and engage students in any way possible, as long as they're doing, I know I have volunteer on here, but I really prefer that students become engaged for credit. So a capstone project, that's for credit, an honors thesis, a for-credit internship, just to keep the students accountable to their local government. We did have a whole class from Millersville University, assist Chester County last year. So, you know, it's very flexible. And here I can show you, this is a pre-existing internship at Penn State University that's offered to their students. And basically they took that pre-existing internship opportunity and they're looking for subject areas and topics of study. So I said, well, hey, how about local climate action planning? And so this is how we've been engaging students from Penn State in the inaugural year of the program and the current year. And then I love how a lot of our advisors and professors give some extra credit to students, like some of the credit hours that are required are a little more than might be used by the students in their actual work for their community. So they think of other creative ways for the students to augment their participation. So this is a blog that the Penn State professor had their LCAP students enter into on a weekly basis for what they were learning as they went through the LCAP program. And then this is my last slide. The secret to this program and the success of it, the true success, is in actual implementation of the actions, the CAP actions. So we don't want these caps to sit on a shelf and collect dust. So we want to continue supporting these communities. And we actually just held a virtual forum, literally from 2 to 3:30 that Eric sat in on. We provided all of our LCAP participants from last year and this year with state government resources from various state agencies to help them implement their climate action plans, and also a time for inaugural year participants to share their lessons learned with current program year participants. And then on top of that, we are using U.S. Department of Energy funds to support 5 of our LCAP participants from the inaugural year in implementing their CAP actions via a shared energy manager program, whereby we are using our U.S. Department of Energy funds to pay an engineering firm, Wilson Engineering Services out of Northwest PA, to serve as a part-time energy manager for 5 of these local governments. They are doing energy benchmarking using Portfolio Manager. They're doing a fleet analysis. They're doing energy audits of these buildings. They're looking at landscaping equipment for Chester County to see the life cycle cost savings if they switch to all electric landscaping equipment in the county. So a variety of projects that the Shared Energy Manager is helping them with. Also, we have additional funding from the U.S. Department of Energy to support some more communities on working at their own pace with all of the resources that we have on our LCAP webpage, and getting access to ClearPath and some technical assistance from ICLEI to go through the program at their own pace. So we still have room for some communities to join that effort. And then also today, the governor's office announced that we are also being assigned some student teams, college student teams from across the Commonwealth to help some of our inaugural year LCAP participants implement their climate actions. So we're going to get more human capital. If it's one thing that I've learned through this program, it's that these local governments need support. They love the human capital that they're getting from their students because they don't have the time or wherewithal to do this work on their own when they're smaller local governments, like a lot of them that we're dealing with. So the best part is, it's not just that the local governments get free human capital, the students get to learn and get real world experience. So with that, I'd love to turn things over to Maddie to present on all the work she did last year in LCAP. Maddie?
Hi, yes, I can share my screen. Hi, my name is Maddie Pelchat. I'm a senior at Drexel University. I'm working on a bachelor's in chemical engineering and a master's in environmental engineering. And I did the Pennsylvania Local Climate Action Program last year, partnering with Bellefonte Borough. So this is just an outline. So I'll be going over the inventorying and climate action planning process for Bellefonte. So I was partnered with Bellefonte. They're the county seat of Center County, Pennsylvania, and they're really close to Penn State, for those familiar with that area. Their population is a little bit over 6,000, and this was their first ever greenhouse gas inventory and climate action plan. So this is just a little bit of what it looks like. I think on the right, it's actually a painting, but they have a small Main Street commercial area as well as residential areas. And this image, these two images just kind of demonstrate one reason why they were interested in joining a program like this. On the left is their park during normal weather, and on the right is one of their parks under flooding conditions. And I've talked to members of the community who have lived there their entire lives. They're in their 70s, and they've said that over the decades, they've seen flooding worsen in this area. So that's one reason that they wanted to join this program. So fall term, I was introduced to ICLEI, which kind of consulted with us since we used their tool ClearPath for the inventory and planning process. And I mainly worked with the Bellefonte Borough Assistant Borough Manager on this aspect. So we decided to go with the U.S. Community Protocol under Scope 1, which is in boundary level data, as this was their first ever greenhouse gas inventory. So we thought that that was the level of data that they would likely have access to. And we also did this for 2017. This program was 2019 through 2020, but we did the inventory on 2017 data. So fall term was collecting this information. There was activity data as well as carbon intensity data. Activity data, for example, for electricity, we would get the electric utility to send information saying, this is how much electricity in kilowatt hours was used by residential, commercial, and industrial sectors within Bellefonte. And then that would be input into ICLEI. And then carbon intensity data for, again, electricity as an example, would be, this is how much coal versus renewable energy versus natural gas is within that electricity mix. And that can be used to compute emissions per unit of activity. So this is what the tool looks like. So as you can see, there's different sectors: energy, transportation, waste, water. We also did fugitive emissions, which is leaking of natural gas. And we didn't step into consumption-based or agriculture or land use, since that was kind of outside the scope for this first ever greenhouse gas inventory for this local community. But as you can see, there's these calculators under residential energy sector. So for Bellefonte, I input information for natural gas, electricity, and heating fuel. And those were all really important. Heating fuel specifically is, it was kind of a higher carbon intensity. So that went into our plan. How do we transition them away from heating fuel? So within these calculators, this is the natural gas one. Their utility, Columbia Gas, sent us this data in therms. And since that was directly measured usage, that's high level data. As you can see, I put medium for emissions factor. Medium would be more like if you had county level data rather than within Bellefonte Borough. And that's just important to keep track of. So to keep track of uncertainties. So after inputting all that information into all these different calculators, these are the results. Energy was the biggest chunk of the pie, followed by water, which they have their own treatment facility in boundaries. And then transportation, as you can see, that's probably too small, but considering that this was scope 1 and it was in boundary data, it didn't really account for commuters traveling outside of the borough. So that's something for future inventories that can really improve the results and make it much more realistic to get the vehicle miles traveled outside of the borough from inside. So that was fall term, and that was the result of fall term, the greenhouse gas inventory. And then starting in spring term, we started a task force within Bellefonte, and that included the council president, the borough manager, Center County planning director, myself, and 2 Bellefonte residents who are knowledgeable in climate strategies. So the task force, our first idea was to get community opinion. So we sent out about 75 mail surveys by mail, and then also sent out a link online. And this was at the beginning of the pandemic, so I'm not sure whether people were really bored in their house and needed something to do, but we had an over 50% response rate, which was unbelievable. But this was just one of the graphs that I got from the results, showing general interest in different topics. So mainly energy within residential homes. Also, even though we didn't do emissions for food consumption, we included local food as there are plans to implement more farmers markets and things like that. So it was interesting to see what the community was interested in themselves. Following this, we did a focus group, and we had about 10 participants in that, and they were selected from the survey. They volunteered themselves from the survey. So whereas the survey had a range of opinion, there were some people who said, I don't want you guys doing any climate action planning, which was fine, as since we were trying to get community input. But the people who did volunteer their time for the focus group were dedicated to actually implementing this plan and were knowledgeable on the topic. So this was actually a really great brainstorming session. Following that, we did a vulnerability assessment. So that's where that falls in the process. We used Climate Explorer as well as another ICLEI tool called Temperate. But on top here is projected temperature rise through 2100. And on the bottom is projected precipitation through 2100 for Bellefonte. So as you can see, they were concerned about flooding, and that unless acted upon, that might become more of an issue over time from these projections. So also in the survey, we asked people about stormwater management and flooding, as we knew that this was likely to be our biggest adaptation policy area. So most of the survey responders did agree that this was an issue. And so we would like to do workshops for residential options, things people can implement in their own homes, as well as in public areas, doing things like rain gardens and new sidewalks to being permeable, things like that. So as well as adaptation policies, we also did brainstorm in the task force some mitigation strategies. So as Heidi mentioned, the state plan, the goal is 80% reduction of 2005 level emissions by 2050. We didn't really have 2005 level emissions. We just had to estimate that based on 2017 emissions and change in population and carbon intensity, things like that. So we kind of estimated a similar goal. But we also did, as well as emission target goals, we had goals for taking actions. Like, for example, under transportation, we wanted to increase electric vehicle charging capabilities. So over 5 years, a certain number of parking spaces would have charging capability, and in the long term, a greater portion would. So things like that to kind of check in over time if we're accomplishing these goals. Also in the ICLEI planning tool, I input measures and it kind of calculated the emission reduction potential of each of these measures. So for example, reducing electricity, switching to renewables, weatherizing homes, things like that, reducing vehicle miles traveled, and all of these together. The blue line at the top, that was the original forecast of how the emissions are expected to rise slowly over time, versus with implementation, it should reduce to less than half of the projected emissions by 2050. So in conclusion, lessons learned. For Bellefonte specifically, their highest emitting sectors were energy, water, and transportation. So those results informed the plan directly, and we prioritized strategies that would reduce emissions related to those sectors. Similarly, for the vulnerability assessment, seeing extreme temperatures and weather in the future, the adaptation policies in the plan prioritized those sectors. It was also encouraging to see that there was community interest in being involved in climate action planning. As at this local level, a lot of the programs will be sort of volunteer based, and just the residents themselves have to elect to make these changes to their homes, things like that. So it was good that there was general interest in implementing these plans. And then lastly, it was clear that we couldn't have done this without ICLEI. Having these results directly inform the decisions in planning for this climate action plan. So yeah, it was definitely important to have a planning tool like ICLEI, and especially with them consulting directly, that was really valuable. So the program ended in June. I did help Bellefonte until about August, when they put it in front of their environmental board, and they made some changes and put in their own ideas. And I believe it has been voted on, but for the future of Bellefonte, that was their first climate action plan, first inventory. So in the future, hopefully we'll get past scope 1 to outside of Bellefonte borough boundaries with our data, and this iterative process will just continue, and they'll implement these plans. So thank you. I don't know if there's any questions right now, but there will be questions after Eric.
Is that my cue to start?
Yes. Thanks.
Okay.
Eric.
Alrighty. So yeah, hi everybody. I'm Eric. I'm glad to talk to you today. I'm mainly going to be talking about regional climate action planning. It's less technical, but it's more theoretical. How local governments that are participating in some of these programs are bunching up together and starting to try to tackle climate change as a group. As Corinne mentioned, I'm a master's student at the University of Pittsburgh, GISPIA. I focus on energy and environmental policy, and I'm going to be graduating next semester, so I'm almost done. Oh, I forgot to share my screen. I apologize because this presentation was not made for this this event, but it'll do. So first, I was what I'm going to be talking about is Connect, Congress of Neighboring Communities. Heidi mentioned it. It is an intergovernmental organization outside and including Pittsburgh, where they help collectively organize their members around different issues that are important to the region. I was first involved in the LCAP program in 2019 before I even started graduate school. I was an intern for one small community, as Heidi mentioned, West Homestead. It's down there on the bottom outside of Pittsburgh. Then I began work with Connect, the local intergovernmental organization that includes Pittsburgh, where I helped Etna and Sharpsburg, and as well Forest Hills as well, finished their LCAPs from the first round of the LCAP program. And then that grew to Connect, me taking on another role at Connect, hiring me to help coordinate their exploration of creating a regional climate action program. And that's representing all 38 municipalities surrounding Pittsburgh. So I went from 1 to 3 to 38, so it's a lot. But right now I'm in the thick of that, where Connect is participating in this year's cohort as a unit, but that still includes all 38 municipalities that we're trying to collect data for. I've had really great experiences with all the managers that I worked with. They're all really passionate people trying to see how they can get their communities more green, how they can engage their communities around climate action. There's a lot of issues in the Connect region and in Western Pennsylvania, stormwater issues, landslides, these things are all connected to climate change. And these communities are really starting to try to figure out how they can mitigate their impact on climate, but also adapt to these sort of stressors that they're experiencing. So I really got to see and work with who's trying to do climate action in like purple America. So a lot of these communities aren't completely sold on the idea, but a lot of them really want to be doing something with this. Many times these communities has about everything, all the cards stacked against them. It's politically challenging. There's a lot of communities that are still struggling because of the departure of like the steel and coal industries around Pittsburgh. Allegheny County is actually the second most fragmented county in the entire country. There's almost 140 municipalities just in one county alone. So that makes planning really difficult. Implementing plans like climate action plans really difficult. And a lot of these governments are less than 1 square mile. So the capacity of local managers, and they don't have sustainability managers, the capacity makes it really, really difficult to get some of this stuff done. But because of this, intergovernmental organizations such as Connect, you know, they have really, the members of these intergovernmental organizations like Connect have really benefited from having intergovernmental organizations try to do utility coordination, solid waste contracting. They're pulling together these disparate communities around these sorts of issues, a common sense of purpose, around really important issues that need to be solved collectively rather than individually. And so you can see where this is going for Connect. Many of these communities started to realize that doing climate action planning by themselves really isn't the best way to go about it. A lot of this stuff is better done together. So, you know, I guess Connect and its 38 municipalities, so then they started participating in this program for the second year all together. They passed a resolution that lays the groundwork for a regional plan that also supports the existing ones and then can create new ones. So we really started to dig deeper as a Connect organization, and all the people involved. We really started to dig deeper into how we can make this a successful regional plan. There's a study out of Boston University that is taking a look at different climate collaboratives around the country, and it's a new trend, right? So before, a lot of thoughts a lot of the thought is doing this individually, but it's becoming a trend where communities are starting to bunch up and do this together because of a lot of the actions that are in climate action plans, like reducing energy consumption or trying to plan around hazards. Doesn't just stop, these sorts of issues don't just stop at one border. You know, it goes across borders. So you need your neighbors to actually participate with you in this sort of stuff. So we really started to dig deeper into how we can make this plan successful with all these different 38 municipalities and all the challenges that they have. And we found three really important, helpful things. And one of them is that the data, it's really, really hard to get this data, despite even with the help from the PADEP, which before, you know, we couldn't get this data at all. Now we can get the data. We've never seen it. It's really great. But a lot of the members are actually clamoring for more. They actually want this data more often. They want to be able to, you know, find ways to work closer with the utilities to get this data and try to overcome the challenges that utilities place in providing this data to them. They want this data more often. They don't want it just every year. They want it every month. Another thing is where do they host this data? So we're really thinking, you know, trying to break down some of these barriers about data, trying to break down some barriers about where to store it and how to use it and how to position members to use it. That's really important to creating a regional strategy that has, say, 38 different municipalities in it. Second was strategy. You know, participating in RCAP as a unit rather than participating in a climate action plan or climate action program as a bunch of different individual members that have to independently come up with their own climate goals by themselves. So that means setting targets as a group. That means, you know, implementing actions as a group. Many climate actions like, you know, energy efficiency and, like I said, hazard mitigation are just simply better when you're doing it in a group, more successful implementation in a group. And when they're done on a larger scale. Also choosing those actions as a group is extremely important too. Plans have, you know, hundreds of actions, I'm sure many of you know, but choosing the most high value ones that members collectively identify as the most important, the most priority actions, choosing those ones to rally behind as a regional program, that's really important for members to continue to be participating in climate action. So, you know, and then finally, it's the infrastructure and the people. So we found that, you know, people are really the most important, you know, aspect of a climate plan, one, and even more important for a regional plan because we're trying to connect all these different municipalities together under a common goal. You know, the idea to expand this program was living in my head and my executive director's head for a really long time. And we realized we really need to get this into other people's heads and get other people nurturing this for it to be successful. So, you know, Connect right now is looking to form an advisory body representative of all of its members. And like Maddie had mentioned, it's kind of like a task force, but it's a task force on steroids, trying to get all these different municipalities behind the same issue and getting all the correct minds in place to get some of these things implemented. That includes, you know, local managers. It includes academic institutions. We have a ton of academic institutions around Pittsburgh, so we're lucky. Facilities management, councils of government, and other elected appointed officials we're trying to get involved right now. Connect's really trying to work towards building up the necessary capacity and the people around this issue. So it might take longer than just the timeline for an LCAP program. We're really trying to think of this rather than just a plan. We're trying to think of this as a process because that's what it actually takes. It takes the people and the process to get something like this off the ground and flying. You know, we had a really good conversation yesterday. We're gonna have a really good conversation tomorrow night, trying to align Connect's regional climate program with the Marshall Plan for Appalachia, which is something that was just announced by Mayor Peduto of Pittsburgh. And that's like a $600 billion investment opportunity for Appalachia to try to move away from fossil fuels to green energy. So we're trying to see how we can wrap this idea of a regional climate program for all of our members into that and try to potentially get some investment for that, which would be really wonderful. So things are really starting to come together. Again, all this is really theoretical, but we have everything here in Connect, and a lot of places around the country have these sorts of things in place. It's just a matter of getting it all together to work regionally. So one other thing, these communities, they're starting to realize how important they actually are to this entire process. There was a thought previously among Connect members that they were too small. They did not affect emissions enough to matter. They didn't affect emissions enough to make a plan for. So we had some preliminary data from last year's Connect communities, and then some from this year. We did the number crunching. Connect represents or emits what would represent 80% of Pittsburgh's emissions every single year. So for those communities, and for those people that don't think that some of these smaller communities can have an impact on climate, it's completely false. In fact, if the city of Pittsburgh doesn't work with Connect communities to try to reduce emissions, they're only going to capture about half of the emissions that you can see there on that chart. So it's really, really important. So a lot of these municipalities are really wanting to act, and they're really wanting to act regionally too. It's really important. So we hope that by doing things regionally, we have a better chance. Like Heidi said, we don't want these sorts of things to end up on a shelf. And acting regionally is one way to keep it going, keep it rolling, and make sure that it doesn't collect dust on a shelf. So that's all I have. But if you have any questions about what regional planning consists of, or what it kind of takes to get to that point, I'd be happy to answer any questions from my experiences.
Great, thank you, Eric, and thank you, Maddie and Heidi, as well for those presentations. I do see, so we'll move over to Q&A now. If you have any questions for any of our speakers, feel free to drop them into the Q&A. And all of our speakers, if you have questions for each other, you're welcome to ask them as well. I do see a question in the Q&A box from Kelly. I believe this is for Heidi. Are shared service agreements between municipalities ever used? It seems like the approach could be useful for such small government entities.
Yeah, actually today I mentioned briefly about the forum, the virtual forum we just held. For our LCAP participants, and that we had representatives from a few different state agencies presenting today. One of those presenters focused on what's called co-stars. I think it's an acronym for something, but again, it's run by our Department of General Services, and it is a cooperative purchasing program whereby, because the power of purchasing in bulk for all sorts of goods and services can bring the cost down for these communities. So we wanted to share co-stars with all of our LCAP participants so that they knew they could even procure for energy consulting services for the purchase of electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. They can do that through co-stars. So yeah, we did share that information with them actually just today.
I'd like to add too, in Connect, we're lucky enough to have the Western Pennsylvania Energy Consortium, which a lot of Connect members are actually members of right now. And the whole goal of that consortium is to try to get lower cost electricity in bulk. And so that's why I was saying earlier, some of these actions like energy efficiency or trying to purchase more green electricity is really important to do it as a group, because that group collectively lowers the cost for everybody to do that. So they're not only getting lower cost electricity, they're getting greener electricity, which is fulfilling the tenets of like what they want to do for their climate action plan. So it's really great.
I have a question for Heidi, and I feel like I'm going to sound stupid asking this question, but as a Pennsylvania resident and a homeowner, you mentioned how important it is for all residents, for all businesses to really take action for us to meet our goals. And I obviously care a lot about climate and the environment. And I've been doing research on how to install solar panels on my home and what kind of incentives there are. And I have in conversations with contractors have learned about Pennsylvania's renewable portfolio standard being pretty low, and therefore our renewable energy credit that you can receive if you have solar panels on your home and you get paid by the utility for the energy that you're providing back to the grid, that credit that you get is pretty low compared to like our neighbors in New Jersey. And so I imagine this might be out of PADEP's purview, but I'm wondering how we get a higher renewable portfolio standard, and how to really increase those incentives so that there's more uptake in people doing renewable energy on their own properties.
Yeah, so there was one of my bullets. I know I was only on that slide for like maybe 30 seconds, if that. But one of our 15 modeled actions in our 2018 Climate Action Plan is to improve our AEPS, our Alternative Energy Portfolio Standard. And that is also in our current Climate Action Plan that we're working on for 2021. We have calls about that on a weekly basis with our consultant ICF. And ultimately, AEPS is controlled by the state legislature. So, always voting, number one, for the right people to be in our state legislature, and then lobbying is something that residents can always do, contacting their legislators, to support ramping up AEPS in the Commonwealth.
Okay, note to self and maybe to the other attendees to write our state legislature.
And then also just something that I just want to make sure that any Pennsylvania residents out there are aware of. Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, the PAPUC, has PA Power Switch. If you just Google PA Power Switch for your home, like in our home, we have 100% renewable energy. It is from out of state, but we basically like renewable energy credits for your home. So, and we're actually getting it for less than the cost of our default supplier, which is PPL Electric, where we are in South Central PA. And you always just want to get a fixed rate. They'll show you apples to apples comparisons of your default supplier versus going 100% renewable. And I'm telling you, a lot of times you can find all renewables for the same cost per kilowatt hour for your electricity, if not slightly less. I think the rate we just locked in, our new fixed rate, which is starting now, all renewables for slightly less than PPL. So I always like to mention that as a way that homeowners can make a difference in Pennsylvania.
Thank you. And another question I think for you, Heidi, from Tinku. So I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Our municipality wants to wait for the Regional Planning Commission to develop a regional climate action plan before proceeding with any climate action planning. Our municipality would be involved in that regional effort, which will kick off next spring. But are there things we can do in the meantime?
Yes, Tinku is actually one of the participants in our local climate action plan program with City of Allentown. So I know, Tinku, we've had a call about this, and actually, I don't know if I haven't been able to tell you yet, but Becky Bradley and I were communicating last week, playing phone tag, because Becky's now excited. The Lehigh Valley Planning Commission is excited to start working on the regional climate action plan and inventory, and I think they want to get involved in the LCAP program. So that's exciting from them. But, again, I think I talked about on our call, Tinku, that there's, and actually Eric hinted on this, there are things that a local government has the authority to enforce, and there are things that the county and the planning commission can enforce. So that's what you need to focus on right now in that sort of draft climate action plan or white paper you're writing of proposed greenhouse gas reduction strategies, is what are those strategies that City of Allentown can start trying to work on to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to impacts. I think that should be the focus.
I actually, Shavonne, if you're still with us, I see a question for you up here from Diane. She's wondering if the Shinnecock Nation is coordinating any of its work or planning with other local communities on Long Island.
So as of yet, I will say no, not when it comes to specifically to climate change, but there are other areas that overlap that we're looking to begin to become more involved with. Like for instance, we're looking forward to working on there's a whole series of tide gauges along excuse me, along Long Island, where they're trying to measure the tide, the change in tide coming in and out. And so we're looking to be a part of that and have some of those markers placed on our own territory so we can connect in the network and create that whole picture for Long Island. We participate, beginning to participate more in some the New York State activities and some of their planning, and we're looking forward to being more involved in that. But for the most part, we're just now beginning to try to form more working relationships with the local municipalities. For the most part, our climate change planning has just been really in-house just with us.
Great, thank you. There is a note from Mark here, not a question, but just a comment, and I'm going to add this to the chat so if folks can see the link that he's shared here. But there's a New York State has established the Utility Energy Registry, a database that provides public access to community scale energy data reported by utilities. So I'm going to add this to the chat so y'all can see that if you want to go to that link. I kind of have a question for Heidi and Shavonne, kind of hearing how all of the work that Pennsylvania is doing at the state level. Heidi, I'm wondering if you keep up with colleagues in New York State, and just with Shavonne's community in mind, do you see parallel efforts in New York State to support local climate action planning in communities in New York? Or in any other state, if there's other states that are kind of doing similar work to what you're doing. Oh, sorry, Heidi, you're on mute.
I am. Always happens. After all these months of doing virtual calls, it still happens to everyone. Anyway, actually just yesterday, I was giving a little update on a quarterly call that we have with NEP, Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnerships. They're a nonprofit based in Lexington, Massachusetts. And they actually inspired the Shared Energy Manager program that I mentioned at the end of my presentation that we're doing with 5 of our LCAP participants from the inaugural year right now. Rhode Island was the inspiration. They started to do a pilot program of Shared Energy Manager with several local governments and school districts in their state. And so I copied off them. So it's a great, Achieving Community Efficiency, ACE, is the name of the actual quarterly updates that we have and the project that NEP is working on with Rhode Island as the pilot state. But other states that tune into that are New York. Massachusetts was on yesterday, and Massachusetts actually presented on a Green Communities program. It's a certification program for communities in Boston, Massachusetts, and then also it's grant funding as well to those communities. So I definitely, and then New York State has their, I think they call it Climate Smart Communities program. Yeah, so I mean, New York, I mean, I work for the State Energy Office in Pennsylvania, and it's not a secret. The State Energy Office in New York is called NYSERDA, and they're the envy of all state energy offices. They are very well funded and have many more staff than Pennsylvania State Energy Office. So NYSERDA is leading on climate and the state of New York in general on climate issues.
And actually, I see that Mark also just wrote about the Climate Smart Communities in the chat with the link there. So if any New York listeners are interested and hadn't heard about the Climate Smart Communities program, there's a link for technical guidance, grants, and leadership recognition. So yeah, check out that link there. Well, I don't think we have any more questions in the Q&A, so I want to open it up to you all if you have any questions for each other or any closing thoughts as we kind of round out the evening.
I just wanted to give a shout out again to the students. I think it's just so impressive to hear both of them speak. I love it. I think what makes this program stand out is it's not just another training program for local governments. It involves students, and I love it. I know one of the Penn State students who presented earlier this year on a session that I was on, she said like her experience in this program has inspired her to want to work for government someday. So, you know, these are great outcomes of the program. And I love that they're getting real world experience that they're going to be able to put on their resumes. So, so thanks, Maddie and Eric.
Thank you, Heidi. Yeah, I loved being a part of that program. Yeah, I've always wanted to like work on a climate action plan and do and hopefully do some mitigation work in my future career. So thanks.
Me too, Heidi. Thank you so much. You realize there was a little bit of trouble getting me in the program at the very beginning last year. And if you wouldn't have gotten me in, I don't know whether Connect might even have a regional plan right now. So thank you very much.
Eric was awesome. He called me on the phone. He's like, I'm really trying to work through this to try to get, you could tell he was like so committed. It was awesome. He was one of the volunteers that participated last year and did not participate for credit. And he is an exception to my rule for sure, because he is just has been a stellar participant. I guess I do have one question for Shavonne. One thing I learned from North Central PA, where we have the Susquehanna River flowing through, and they have a lot of flooding issues from the river. So it's not the ocean, which is your instance, but it's flooding from our largest river in the Commonwealth. They were talking about how they would move all livable surfaces, like not on the ground level, like try to move everything up, especially like your HVAC unit, your heating unit, move it up. Like, have you guys been doing that at Shinnecock? Has that been discussed as a way to keep, you know, structures there, you know, for another set of years? And I don't know, I just know they were doing that. Oh, you're doing what I did earlier, yes. Shavonne.
I left it off before. You know, what I had mentioned earlier is that that's something that we really haven't moved towards just yet, because we've been fortunate where the homes haven't been experiencing that kind of damage. Occasionally, some people have some flooding in their basements, but those are the types of mitigation efforts that might need to begin to take place. But the first thing is to really assess individual homes, where they are and how it's changing where they are. Some people are in more of a marshy area and some people aren't. Their backyards are a little more sandy. So I think it's gonna have to be on a case by case. And, you know, again, that type of planning and technical expertise is something that requires financial resources. So I know people mention, you know, New York State programming. I mean, I don't want to say anything too controversial, too political, but there are a lot of programs that the state offers that tribal communities are not able to apply for because of the definitions of municipality and what makes you eligible. And so that's why, you know, when I talk about the challenges of funding these projects, you know, it's great to have the plan and the idea, but then you need, you know, the other components to actually implement it. And so, you know, but that's how we try to connect and partner and, you know, for example, working with students, you know, that could be the type of project that we could possibly hope a college would be interested in helping us with. And maybe they would just do a case study on a couple of homes and say, well, these would be the recommendations that we can make. You know, that's the kind of work I do. I look for different resources that may not, it's not necessarily money, but people's time is valuable. And when they're willing to contribute it, then it helps us leverage when we are applying for funding. So that, you know, that's a big part of what I have to do, is actually finding the resources to make these things come to life.
And I want to ask a stupid question, Shavonne. So pardon me, I was just curious, like I know the reason that the communities up in, it's Muncie, Pennsylvania is the name of the town. They were moving their HVAC units up to the first level, and then that would reduce their flood insurance rates significantly. Our tribal communities, are they exempt from, I mean, are you paying flood insurance there? Like it's crazy expensive, or are you exempt?
People actually can't get flood insurance because the area is so prone that a lot of times you can't even find a company that will insure you. So our tribal government does not mandate that homeowners have insurance, but there are plenty of tribal members who seek home insurance. And you know they have home insurance, but it doesn't necessarily cover flooding. And a lot of that is because in this area we have a lot of beach homes, and people build on the beach, and then the storm destroys it. And what do? They take the insurance money and they build the house right back where it was. So it becomes like this repetitive cycle. So like practically the whole reservation, almost the whole reservation is in a flood zone, characterized as a flood zone. So,
Okay.
yeah, so all places.
Interesting.
So do you happen to know, Shavonne, if the climate smart communities, have you looked, is that a program that would be eligible for tribal communities?
I actually have not specifically looked into that. You know, like I said, I don't want to speak on it too much because this is a recorded public discussion, and I was in a meeting with other nations and there were representatives there, and you know, it was discussions about eligibility took place. So I'm just going to say at this point in time that no, I haven't thoroughly looked into it because it didn't seem like it was something we were eligible for.
Yeah,
I'll
it's
double
really,
check it.
it's really important, especially for us to see like what falls through the cracks when you think you're coming up with something that will be helpful. You know, when do people fall through the cracks? I think it is really important for us to know.
Right.
So I'll look into it. Maybe I'll follow up with Mark if he knows more about the program. Well, thank you. This was such an enriching conversation, and I think it's such a great demonstration. We typically in these seminar series have looked at kind of the more urban parts of the corridor and where the cities are between Philly and Boston, and it's unusual for us to kind of to take a dive into some of the smaller communities in the corridor. So it's fascinating to see how climate conversations are happening, you know, in all levels, all sizes of government, of communities, and how important a conversation it is. So I really appreciate all of our speakers today. Thank you so much. Oh, and actually, sorry, I just noticed that Mark has a comment here. Tribal communities are not currently eligible for the Climate Smart Communities program, and making them eligible would require change in Department of Environmental Conservation regulations. And there's not.
Didn't want to say all that, but thank you, Mark.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely an important point to follow up on, and maybe that's you know, something that we'll keep in mind. So thank you. That's really, really important information. So thank you again to our panelists and to the speakers. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope we'll have you back for another seminar again one day.
Thank you, Corinne, and thank you to everyone who spoke today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.
Thanks. Have a great evening.
Thanks for coordinating, Corinne. Take care.